Forget frequently asked questions.
Common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
go above and beyond.
They become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
with Richard Jacobs.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius Podcast. I have a returning guest, Carl Johan Calleman. He has a Ph.D. in physical biology from the University of Stockholm, following which he was a senior researcher at the School of Public Health at University of Washington in Seattle, focusing on identifying toxic substances in the human environment. We're going to make a conscious decision today to talk about the evolution of consciousness, just to get a pun in right at the beginning of the interview. So, Carl, thanks for coming back.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Richard.
Yeah, no problem. I guess right off the bat, what does it mean, evolution of consciousness? I guess all people are conscious to varying degrees, but is our consciousness itself evolving? And if so, what does that mean? Where is it going?
Yeah, well, this is a hotly debated topic in science today, you might say. And I think the origin to that hotness is the fact that quantum physics, when it was developed about 100 years ago, they realized that the observer, the conscious observer, played a significant role for the result. And it's taken a long time for this finding to actually be more broadly recognized. And so today there is this division line in science and more broadly among people that are interested in this kind of a question. There is one line of thought that says that consciousness is a primary factor in the universe, and it cannot be explained by any of the material aspects of the universe that we know. Then there is the other side of the argument, which is maintained essentially by what you might call official science, which says that consciousness is a product of the development of the matter into a kind of a very complex brain, especially than what human beings will have. And so here we have really the traditional division line between what you might call idealists and materialists. And this tension, you might say, it really goes to the heart of the matter of what science is, what science might be, etc. And it also includes many, you might say, spiritual or even religious aspects of it. I mean, for instance, if you go to India and look at their traditional way of thinking, they would say that consciousness is primary to matter. And that's my view as well.
One second. So living things versus non-living things, do both have consciousness, just different levels of it? Or what's your thought?
Well, I don't think non-living things have any consciousness. I mean, consciousness, the way most people in this debate are discussing it, is simply the subjective experience that we have. Where does the subjective experience come from? That, I would not say that any non-living thing has consciousness. But I agree, okay. There are people that are saying that. There are people who says that an electron is conscious. There are people that are saying that a stone is conscious. But that's not my view.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you. And then within living things, how far down, so in my body, I feel like one thing, even though I'm composed of many things. Do you think like my liver has a consciousness, or the individual cells that compose me? Or do you think like all of me together is one thing and then my microbiome is another thing? Like down to what level of living organisms do you think there is some level of consciousness?
I would say that there is, the nature of life is to have that kind of a secluded, there is a difference between an inner working and the outer surroundings, so to speak. Even if you take the very simplest bacteria, you will find that inside of themselves, they have what you might call a machinery of biochemical reactions and so forth that is is clearly distinct from what goes on outside of them. And I would say that even going down to the simplest bacteria, has a certain level of consciousness. If you go to paramecium, which is a very small animal, you have to have microscopes to see it, but you can study it and see that it actually makes choices, that it can actually learn things, and several other aspects that we would say requires some kind of a consciousness in this organism. So the way I look upon it, consciousness drives the entire evolution of biology, really. And so it's quite a different story compared to the school version or the official science that says life is an accident according to the Darwinist model. Instead, in my view, consciousness has driven evolution to the point where we are now. And that's not the same kind of a consciousness that a human being has as say a flatworm or a paramecium or something like that. But there is a commonality. They're all conscious. It's just that over time, for instance, the human beings have a consciousness, have developed a human being with a much more versatile sensory apparatus compared to, for instance, the paramecium. But the consciousness is the same in principle. It is something that distinguishes what's on the inside from what is outside. It's really life. You don't have life without consciousness, and you don't really have consciousness without life.
Where does it, where does it extend to? So does my consciousness reside, like when I thought about this, I feel like I am in this spot, I don't know, between my eyes, maybe a little bit above that, like my third eye, yeah. I don't know, a few inches in, I feel like that's where I am. Yeah. If I concentrate on my foot or something, I guess yes, it's part of my body, but I don't feel like that's where I am.
I would agree. Yeah.
So, but how far does consciousness extend? Does it extend outside the body? Do you have to work to do that? And, can people cause themselves to have out-of-body perception and things like that? Like, what's your thought?
I think they can. Yeah. At least temporarily. I think that's pretty well documented that there are many cases where people have seems to have, they have been able to, especially when in near-death experiences, that they have moved out of their body, really, and still be able to see things that, meaning they're conscious of certain things. But that's basically, I would say, a transitory aspect of the thing. But it does point to consciousness being primary to matter, I would say.
Okay. But what are some of your big realizations about consciousness? What do you feel like you've figured out that it really isn't talked about much in the literature, or is everything you've thought of there? Yeah. It'd be really cool if it was there from thousands of years ago, I guess. But what have you observed?
Well, this is a huge topic. I've written 7 books on it in one way or another. And one realization then is that how all the various life forms actually follows a certain wave or a couple of different wave movements that serve to evolve not only biological organisms, but also in the case of human beings, which is sort of an end result of the evolution of biological organisms. But in the case of human beings, you can also see that the evolution of the mind follows certain waveforms. And this is kind of hard to describe for somebody who does not have a diagram in front of you. But basically, there is a timing to this evolution of consciousness. And that's what my work has largely been about. It's just basically an unknown aspect of reality. And in this view, the consciousness goes back to the very birth of the universe. And life is not something that emerged as a result of a series of accidents on our planet. The exact timing of the first appearance of bacteria, the first appearance of higher cells, and so forth, follows a time plan, and it's a time plan that you might say is caused by a series of different waves that are self-similar and added to one another. It's sort of like a pyramidal structure of waveforms. And this is then, it's a big topic, and obviously since been covered by so many, by so much. But that is by itself a significant thing to demonstrate that the idea that life is an accident, which is still what official science maintains, that is simply not true. And one way of showing it is just to show that there is a timing for the emergence of all biological species.
Well, okay, so do you think that consciousness is evolving individually in each creature that has it, or do you think there's a whole direction in which all consciousness and amongst all living things is going?
Yeah, I think there is a direction, and in terms of the biological evolution, it's been aiming for the creation of human beings, and then you have human beings. And the human beings will then also develop consciousness, or consciousness will then develop human beings into what I say. It follows a pattern where initially human beings are sort of living in a fairly floating state of consciousness. And then 5,000 years ago, there was a download of a new frame of consciousness that brought them horizontal and vertical lines. And then that created civilizations. And then, there is another wave that started in 1755, and among many other things that, changed the world with industrialization. The Industrial Revolution is a product of a shift in consciousness. And then in 1999, there is another shift which brings the digital revolution. So what humans create basically is a product of the state of consciousness that they are downloading from the cosmos.
What do you mean they're downloading from the cosmos? You mean, my consciousness is, I guess, always interacting with the environment around me, but am I getting updates to it? And if so, from where? Besides my experience and my senome, my sensory apparatus.
Yeah, you are getting... the human consciousness is coming from the cosmic center. And again, this is, this would require showing a number of substantiating diagrams and things like that. But I think that's really one of the illusions that many people are living with, that their consciousness is something that's produced by their own brain. The brain, the consciousness is downloaded by the brain, or the mind is downloaded by the brain.
Well, I don't know. I recently read a book on near-death experiences by a guy named Bruce Grayson. They put it, I think, differently. They said in the experiences, people came out of their body and they felt they were a fuller version of themselves, a lot of the
Yes.
people. And they didn't want to go back into their body because that constrained them. So
Yeah.
what I got from that is that maybe we're all like swimming, or the consciousness is an ether around us. And I don't know if we're downloading it, but I guess our physiology is shaping how we experience it, where it's running through us continually, and the structure of our brain and our body is shaping it, limiting it, changing it, etc. Like channeling water, again, through a particular channel. Does that align with what you're thinking?
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
Essentially, it does, except from the point that, my view, and this is not just something I'm saying, I produce a lot of evidence for it, but my view is that the specific frame of consciousness is downloaded, or it's actually a combination of different frames of consciousness or states of consciousness, and they're downloaded. They're not coming from our brains. And so, if people that have had these kind of near-death experiences will think of their bodies as limiting, that makes perfectly sense, because the consciousness is then actually not coming from their bodies or their brains. The consciousness comes from outside of their brains. It's downloaded from the cosmos. So, there's a lot of, we have a lot of common points here, but it may be that we differ on that, the idea of the origin of our states of consciousness.
I guess one way to think about it, which probably most people think about, I guess, is that consciousness is static. It's in them. It's constrained by their physiology, and that's it. And then you're talking more about like a flow-through system, so if it's flow-through, or if someone's downloading, that means that depending on where they are, just like breathing in polluted air versus clean air, moist air versus dry air, they're constantly taking in different stuff from the ether, from the universal consciousness. So do you think that's what's happening? And if so, what's the implication of that?
Well, yeah, there is this, I would say so. I mean, you did mention something like, you talked about going to different countries and maybe experiencing reality. And that's, one of the things that mediates the consciousness that human beings will have is the planet. And for instance, then there is a clear division line between the Western and the Eastern hemispheres. And people think differently, at least traditionally, they thought differently in the West compared to the East. And this has to do with the fact that there is a planetary midline that separates these two hemispheres. And based on that, you might say that the consciousness has been different in the East from the West. It's not, historical accidents that have created this dichotomy between East and the West. It's inherent in the design of the Earth, as that people will change, think differently in the West compared to the East, in the same sense that we will think differently with our left and right brain hemispheres. So, in this sense, yes, there is definitely an effect of location on our planet in terms of how we organize the world. And, this is not just speculation, because there's done these kind of psychological studies comparing people living in the Far East and the Far West, comparing students in Shanghai from those in San Francisco. And it turns out that it's not just a matter of having different philosophies like Christianity and Buddhism or something like that. No, the actual thought structures, the way that people organize psychologically their thinking is different. And this has to do with the fact that the Earth is a relay. So the West-East dichotomy relays to the left-right brain half dichotomy. And that's why we have this kind of a ability to think in the interaction between the two hemispheres to begin with.
Okay, so I mean, what's the implication of that? Is it again, if you consider consciousness to be a flow-through thing?
I'm not sure what you mean by flow-through.
Well, you're saying, so when you say, all right, I'll put it in your terms, so you're saying you download, from the universe, but is it a download that happens constantly, once a month, only if you're in a novel circumstance? Like, what is the nature of it? What does it look like in your mind?
Yeah. Okay. So there's a series of different waves that are creating consciousness. You might call them macrocosmic quantum waves. And the evolution of the universe has been sort of like climbing between, adding new levels of consciousness on top of the others. You might say. And when these, say, for instance, 1755, a new state of consciousness became accessible to the human beings. And then, as a result of that, you could see the Industrial Revolution began, democracy began, all kinds of people became more humanitarian, more egalitarian, etc., etc. And this was not a randomly happening event. It happened because at that point in time, the 1755, a wave became accessible that has been running with humanity ever since and have made her think in such a way that she's been able to create the industrial world. Something similar happened in 1999. Then you have another wave that is being accessible. And this is what created this whole digital world that we are now swimming in, if you like. This is a mental change that the cosmos gave to us. And for that reason, we have a new kind of a creativity, which at the current time is very much focused on the digitalizing the world and so forth. So there's a sequence of these points in time when new frames of consciousness have been activated. And as that happened, and probably the most marked one was the one that happened in 3000 BC, when the first civilizations emerged. And suddenly people reorganized life totally. They became able to write, they became able to, they created nations, they built pyramids, they built cities, they built, they started to use calendars, and all of which comes, it's not something that suddenly for no reason they got these new capabilities. The reason is that it was a shift in consciousness. A new frame of consciousness became accessible at that point in time. And ever since, this has been playing out in how human history has been taking shape.
But why would it come at discrete times, and where is it coming from? Who's sending it out, and why?
It comes from the center of the universe, and then it sort of is relayed through the galaxies and to the Earth. And as I mentioned, then we are in resonance with the east-west dichotomy of the Earth. Now, why is this? I don't know. Somebody designed it. You can call it God, you can call it whatever. But what is happening in the evolution of the universe, it fits perfectly with these kind of waves, and why this universe is created. I don't know. I could take some kind of a religious basis for it, but it's really beyond me. But to say that it's just an accident is to me, it's just crazy, because everything fits perfectly. And, one of the biggest discoveries, I would say, of 20th century science was the fact that the finding that the universe was perfectly fine-tuned for the emergence of life. There's a lot of very sort of considered authorities in physics that just says the probability of this universe being fine-tuned for life is like 1 in 10, and then it's 100 different zeros coming after it. It just couldn't happen, because everything is fine-tuned for life. And to go from that insight, that really is one of the most important insights of 20th century science. And to go from that and then assume that life is an accident, to see that it's fine-tuned for life, but then go into the idea that it's just, the Darwinist idea of random mutations driving evolution. It's totally incoherent and doesn't make any sense. So, if you agree with that finding that so many scientists have contributed to, physicists have contributed to, which is that life, the universe is fine-tuned for life. If you accept that, and of course you're free to either do it or not, but if you accept that, what is the problem by then going on to say that there is also a sort of underlying plan, if you like, for how consciousness has evolved?
Well, I don't agree that that everything is random and life came from nothing and all that. When you say that the universe is fine-tuned for life, or is just the Earth fine-tuned for life?
No, it's the universe is fine-tuned for life. I mean, yes, the Earth is also, including the Earth, is fine-tuned for life. But there is a number of different constants of physics that if they were just a couple of % different from what they are now, then the universe would never have been able to harbor life. And this is not my research. That's people like Stephen Hawking and people like that have found that. And for instance, that if the universe itself is fine-tuned for life and not just Earth, why is there life? Why does life only seem to be on Earth and we can't find it anywhere else yet? Well, I would think there is life out in a number of different places. We haven't found it, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. In my view, it may exist in a large number of places, and they do find planetary systems that seem, from our perspective anyway, based on what we know of what conditioned life on this planet, would be able to harbor life also in other places. We haven't found it. I mean, who knows if whether it's a rare event? I don't know, but I think it's not a unique event. I don't think there are so many people that think that this is the only place in the universe. We have maybe a trillion stars in this galaxy, and the universe might have, I couldn't say exactly, maybe 500 billion galaxies. Now, doesn't seem reasonable to assume that we would be the only place of all these gazillion planets that would harbor Earth. At least I wouldn't believe it. But the point when I'm talking about the constants of nature being fine-tuned for life is that it's not just the Earth, because these constants are believed by physicists to be valid across the universe. So for instance, there is something called the strong force attracts the nucleons in the nuclei of atoms. And if that would have been a little bit stronger, then you would have had a rapid development of all the original hydrogen and helium. That's not the case. If it would have been a little bit weaker, and we're talking about just a few percent weaker, then maybe higher elements like carbon and nitrogen and oxygen that are necessary for biological life might never have been formed, because that particular force that are keeping that are defining what kind of elements are formed in the universe would be too weak. And right. So this is and then there's a number of these constants. Maybe it's 10, maybe it's 20 that would be considered basic to the formation of the universe we're living in. And they all seem to be constrained, or in other words, if they were just a couple of percent different from what they are, we wouldn't have life anywhere. It's a universal. These constants are universal constants. So it really is not just about our own particular Earth.
But why do you say that again? That there have been periodic downloads from the universe. Like again, so we have all these constants. The universe is balanced on the head of a pin, which it's amazing in itself. But you talked about a cosmic center. I mean, physicists seem to say there is no center of the universe. It's everywhere, which is weird. But where do these waves of new consciousness come from?
Well, I would still argue that it comes from the center of the universe. Some people would say that it's a common saying that, there is no center. And what do they know about that? To begin with, we don't see the entire universe. We can only see to what they call the event horizon, which is about 15 billion years or 14 billion years light years away. And then we know that the universe is much bigger than that. But the limit on the speed of light makes us not be able to see that. But there is another, there is a tangible basis for the assumption that at least there is a division line that goes through the universe, what is now in science called the preferred axis, the cosmic axis. And it was discovered in 2004. And this axis then, through the WMAP satellite. And the purpose of this WMAP satellite was to measure what's called the cosmic background radiation, which is an afterglow from the Big Bang. And meaning that it goes back, actually, what you see when you study this afterglow is actually some kind of a baby picture of the universe, the way it looked 380,000 years after the Big Bang. And what they found was that there was a central axis that went through this. And initially they called this, and this is made by people at MIT and all the prestigious centers of science. They called it initially the axis of evil. And the reason wasn't that they really thought so, but they thought that it was so disturbing for the prevailing or the dominating theories of science that they would jokingly call it evil. But then there was a whole discussion then. Is this real or is it an artifact? Is something that is produced on a more closer? We're looking at the cosmic background radiation. We look at the entire cosmos, and then. But the debate continued. But then in 2012, they sent up a second satellite, which was called the Planck Satellite, after the founder of quantum theory, and which detected this cosmic background radiation by a totally different method. And it found the same axis. And then there's been a lot of studies done on this in astronomy. They don't really come out. But one of the interesting findings is that there was a study made by an Indian astronomer published in 2015, Dr. Singhal, who compared the number of huge radio sources to the left and to the right of this central axis, what's now called, they no longer call it axis of evil, they call it the preferred axis of cosmology. And he found that...
One second, if there's an axis, where is it, and what does it divide the universe into? What's above it, below it, left, right, etc.?
Right. So what this Indian astronomer found was that there was a significant difference in the amount of radio sources on the left and the right side of in other words, this is a picture of the entire universe. And so you will have you're not talking about the Earth's west and eastern hemisphere, you're talking about the cosmic hemispheres. And so there was like 38 in one side and 15 on the other side. This really then, it's not a physical axis, it's a place you find where the cosmic background radiation is different on the two different sides. And also today you can find a number of different phenomena, like the handedness of galaxies, the directions of jet beams going out of dark black holes, and these quasars, huge radio sources that have existed since the birth of the universe, really.
So is the universe right-handed or left-handed?
Yeah, that's the question. It's different in these two different hemispheres if you look at how galaxies are handed. So
like if I flush my toilet in Australia, it's going to go a different way, I guess because of the Coriolis effect. But so do we observe handedness is different in different parts of our universe?
Huh. Yes, that's right. And so it's really kind of strange that this thing hasn't dissipated into the public more than it has. But it really means that, we have grown up with the idea that the large scale of the universe doesn't have any kind of structure. Einstein's theories of general relativity is based on that assumption that there is no large scale structure. And now, and we haven't thought, could there be an up and a down in the universe? Could there be a right and a left in the universe? That's how we grow up, thinking that that's not the case. Now, what this tells us is that's no longer valid. There is a structure to the entire universe. And you might call it a Yin Yang Duality on the largest scale of the universe. And so what does this matter? Well, it means that even if we may not be able to pinpoint the exact center of the universe, we can find a line that separates the two hemispheres. And that's.
What are we in the left-handed or the right-handed version? And what's been noticed about the difference in the structure and the planets and the goings on in the two divided areas?
I don't know if anyone can tell that, because you're looking at the rest of the universe, and so I would say that what should I say? You can think of yourself as looking at some kind of a pole standing in the earth at a long distance from yourself. And then you can say that there is something to the left of it, or you can say something to the right of it. But really, can you tell where you are as an observer if you're on left or right? No, you cannot do that. So this is the situation.
Well, so the person that discovered this, again, this handedness, again, what's been observed in the two parts. I mean, if he discovered it, I'm sure he would say, all right, well, let's look at both parts and see what's different. So what is different? What's been observed so far?
Well, the handedness, it means that if you look at a galaxy, a spiral galaxy, you could see it rotated clockwise or counterclockwise, basically. And so you can say that the two clockwise or counterclockwise means that it's the galaxies have different handedness. And this was first found by Professor Longo at the University of Michigan. And it was a preliminary study. And but then it has been, they started in England something they call the Galactic Zoo, which was really a large-scale attempt to verify these findings, and did so. And what does it mean? Well, it means that the universe has a center. That's how I would like to.
Well, it sounds like it has a line of symmetry, but it still could be infinite on either, in all directions on the line of symmetry, Yes,
I would agree. I would agree. But then, when you look at this and then you count this difference in, for instance, in the number of radio sources, and you're talking about radio sources like 13, 14 billion light years away from here, and you find this big difference between the two, then you have the kind of fundamental duality on the level of the entire universe. And that duality, and it's not possible for me to connect all the dots here, because that duality is the origin of consciousness. The consciousness always implies some kind of a distinction between internal and external. You have this experience that you are inside seeing something outside. And that requires a certain kind of distinction, a objective, subjective distinction. And as I said, I can't connect all the dots here, but if I can communicate the fact that people can go and study on the internet or whatever, that look for axis of evil or look for cosmic preferred axis in cosmology. Look for those things, and then you will get the references to see what kind of separations, what kind of dichotomies this creates. And then you already have this basis. It's not filling in everything, as you said, but you do realize that there is a structure to the universe, and that there is an axis that separates the main hemispheres. And that's a good starting point for going deeper into the matter. And this existed from the very birth of the universe. So, it comes down to, again, this duality is inherent in the universe. As is the creation of life.
Well, where is this line of symmetry? Is it near Earth? Is it Earth? Does it go through Earth? Is it billions of light years away? Where is it?
It's in the direction of the constellation of Virgo. This has actually been some debate around these topics, because they are so alien to how the universe has been perceived, really. It was something happening, I would go up, there was something happening this year in that regard. I would have to go to Wikipedia to see what it was.
Yeah, I looked up like Axis of Evil, and there's an article by Lawrence Krauss, I know from Case Western University, that seems to say that I guess some of the symmetry of the center of the universe may actually be the plane that the Earth makes as it travels around the sun, which would be crazy.
Yeah, that's not necessarily true, but let's see here. Now I came to the George Bush version of it. So I'll have to come to the axis of evil in cosmology, but that's where they got the idea. Okay, so then it says in June 2020, the axis of evil observation was confirmed by a study conducted by Lior Shamir, which verified the same result via a different measurement. Shamir commented, "We have two different sky surveys showing the exact same patterns, even when the galaxies are completely different. There is no error that can lead to that. This is the universe that we live in. This is our home." So that's what he said. And so there's been a sequence of things, and as I verifying the existence of this, and regardless of how you interpret it, it should change anybody's worldview fundamentally, because it tells us that from its very inception, the universe had a structure at its very, very largest scale. And then, if you follow my line of thinking, and so, so far that's verified and so forth. But if you follow my line of thinking, this duality, this dichotomy between hemisphere is dissipated down through the universe, down to ourselves. And it is actually part of the universal structure that helps us download a particular structured mind. The structure of the universe is going down through the galaxy, to the heliosphere, to the planet, to ourselves. And that's why we have a structure as well, where we have this dichotomy between left and right brain half. And if we didn't have that dichotomy, we probably wouldn't be conscious.
So, okay. I guess if the universe can be handed, so can we. So it's I guess there's a symmetry, there's a self-similarity at all levels, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Interesting. Well, I mean, where is this going then? So how have you taken this knowledge, and where are you going with your work? What are you trying to figure out?
Well, it's going in different directions. There are 9 different waves that are bringing the consciousness of humanity, and we're all downloading a sort of an interference pattern of these different waves. And the highest of these waves is the 9th wave. It's the top level, so to speak, and which actually tends to cancel out the duality and brings a unified state of consciousness to human beings. So that's part of what I'm doing. I'm working with this in order to facilitate for people to bring about a change in their own state of consciousness, going to a unity state of consciousness that doesn't separate in the way that the lower ways will do. That's one avenue that I'm pursuing. Then I'm also, which is more towards people in general, because I think it's a very meaningful way of understanding how things are evolving on our planet and what is happening in the world today, etc., while we can't go into any detail of it here. But the second thing is really to look to address more scientific questions that comes out of this. If consciousness comes from the very birth of the universe and has evolved ever since, even if what we call physical life or biological species only are about 4 billion years. But consciousness precedes that. And if that is so, it's to develop a understanding of how we're actually the products of a kind of a cosmic plan. And these different, I mentioned the different revolutions in technology that actually has been caused by the downloading of new types of minds, new states of consciousness, really. Then that also has affected science. And so one thing I'm thinking about here is to make the argument, for instance, that space and time, which is really the foundation of most of modern mathematical physics, space and time are actually not independently existing categories in the universe, in the material universe. You don't see them anywhere. You don't see any of the dimensions of space. You don't see time anywhere. So where that comes from is an aspect from a mind that we have downloaded from the cosmos. And that will change. That changes physics, how it's perceived totally. From that perspective, you will also be able to no longer have the kind of conflict between quantum theory and general theory of relativity. It's been one of the big stumbling points, you might say, in modern physics, is that the quantum theory and the general theory of relativity are in conflict with each other. It's not only that one is the macrocosmos and another is the microcosmos. It's also that they operate according to different kind of principles. In the general theory of relativity, space and time exists, whereas in the quantum realm, you can't really talk about space and time. So
before we get into that, that's like unbelievably complicated. I want to ask you more about these downloads.
Yeah.
How do you know what's in them? How do you know what occurred? Like, how do you know anything about these downloads?
Well, you know them because you know the times when they happened. And then
how do you know when they happened? What tells you that it happened at a particular time? It's
basically based on the Mayan calendar.
So there's just a renaissance of thought, and to you that's saying that there was this is when it happened?
Yeah.
Okay.
So one of the famous aspects of the Mayan calendar is the so-called long count that started in 3115 BC. And they described this, the activation of this new calendar, which was really a new wave of consciousness. They described that. And they described it as something happening on a cosmic level. And they described the geometric change that happened on a cosmic level.
When was the most recent one? Was it 1750 or more recent than that?
No, then 1755 was one. Then there was one 1999, and then finally one in 2011. And that's the last one, and now they're all running in parallel.
Well, so you were around for some of these. So what did you experience? And did you know beforehand what was going to happen? When it happened, does it happen in a moment or a year? And did you experience anything?
Well, who hasn't experienced the digital revolution? I don't know.
Well, how would I expect to experience this? Is it all of a sudden I feel things, or I just observe in my outside world that, people seem to be thinking differently lately about stuff, and this is what I'm observing.
It's really both, but if you want to have verification, and not just based on how I may experience things, if you want verification, you will have to look at what happened in the outside world, and that's pretty easy to verify. It's just that people don't know it, and but then. How does your experience change? Well, I can say that I can follow these changes in experience and in many different ways. But if somebody is coming new to understand how the evolution of consciousness takes place in the universe, the best way to do it is then to study the kind of verifiable, objective events that happened outside of themselves.
But again, how fast do you think it happens? And is anyone aware of it happening? Or is it just like around the world? I've heard of the idea of simultaneous invention. That seems to have happened many times for some strange reason. Yes. So what do you think, let's say it's happening. What do you think happens? Like all of a sudden around the world, certain subsets of people just start to have ideas that come to them seemingly from nowhere? Like, how do people experience this?
Yeah, no, that's exactly what happened. I mean, the most clear example is then, for instance, the beginning of the sixth wave in 3115 BCE, because that's really the time when we have the first civilizations on our planet in Egypt and Sumer and in the Indus Valley. And before that time, you don't find pyramids anywhere. But after that time, people in very diverse places on our planet, going as far as Peru and Mongolia, at that time, people are starting to build pyramids, which is a crazy idea at least from a modern perspective. You're putting all this energy into creating a perpendicular structure. It's a crazy idea unless you know that at that particular time, a shift in consciousness took place that brought this kind of a structured, geometrically structured mind into existence. So that's exactly what happens, that when one of these changes takes place, and this is the clearest example is the original rise of civilization 5,000 years ago, then people all over the planet suddenly change their habits. Not everywhere, because the conditions for creating a civilization were not equal, or in say Siberia from what they were in Egypt. Egypt was a fertile region, so was the Indus Valley and Sumer. But then, if the conditions were like that, favorable to the rise of civilization, once they downloaded it, and you can see an endless amount of verifications from these cultures that they experienced a shift. They talked about it as a creation by the gods. And whether you believe in that or not, I wouldn't personally look upon it really as gods, but certainly a download from a higher place, from the cosmic source. And that's what they talked about. And that's why there is such a remarkable demarcation line, so that before this point in time, you don't have any civilization, you don't have any pharaohs, you don't have any nations, you don't have any calendars, you don't have any pyramids, you don't have any cities. And after that time, they start. And that's because there was a mind change brought by this shift in consciousness. And I could go on with the same thing, what happened in 1755, and where people, the mind change was quite significant in different ways. So history is not just sort of some kind of a line coming into existence by accidental events. It's the product of quantum shifts in consciousness that we download from the cosmic center.
So, any idea of when the next one is coming? And
there won't be any.
What will be in it?
I don't think there will be any. The ninth wave is the last one, which was activated in 2011, and which brings another kind of consciousness. It doesn't bring any technological revolution. It's one that brings a unified consciousness. One that doesn't separate. I can say that much. And it's already accessible. And some people are working on downloading it. On New Year's Day, I will be participating in a event where several thousand people will be looking into this whole thing. And because they're interested in downloading this ninth wave.
But when was the ninth wave? 2011 or now?
Yes. No, 2011. Yes, that's when it was activated. But then,
why has it been 9 years to do anything about it? Why wasn't it all done in a day or something?
Yeah, I don't know. Why was the Big Bang 14 billion years ago? Why didn't the world come into existence immediately? And I would say the reason is that the universe is created through a stepwise process, and it doesn't happen immediately, because that would mean a too big a change. for everything. So really, the way it's been developed is by a sequential activation of higher states of consciousness. And then when each of these states of consciousness have been activated, it will move in a wave form, you might say, where every peak in the wave will bring the new state of consciousness forward. So I'm not saying that everything is happening immediately. You know, even if you look at, say, the digital revolution, if you look at the industrial revolution of 1755, well, it took until 1769 until the steam engine was developed. It took until 1884 until the car was invented. It took until 1905 until the airplane was invented, etc., etc. It's the same thing here. It doesn't happen immediately with the ninth wave. This is something people need to cultivate if they want to be part of it, and it goes up and down like this.
But according to the timeline you've given of the different waves, they're coming faster and faster and closer closer together. So why would you think this is the last one, and why do you think they're speeding up?
Well, the speeding up, you know, I think is almost self-evident. A lot of people have experienced in their lifetime a tremendous speed up of time. And, you know, I can refer back also scientifically, you might say, Carl Sagan developed something that he called the cosmic clock. And so basically what he did then was that he took the entire evolution of the universe from the Big Bang to our own time and divided it up until the current time. And if you do that, then pretty much nothing happens until the last month. And the invention of computers is in the last second, so to speak. The entire evolution of humanity is probably the last hour before midnight. Don't quote me on these figures, but that's the whole idea. What he wanted to convey with this is that if you study the evolution of the universe, there's been a tremendous speed up in the development of complexity. And one thing that explains this is the fact that these waves of creation that are stacked upon each other will lead up to something that has a very, very high frequency, and meaning it develops phenomena very, very rapidly compared to 10 billion years ago when things were very, very, very slow. So speed up, and you will find a lot of people that in their lifetimes have experienced, at least up until 2011, they experienced that things were really speeding up.
But how could you know that this is the last one? How could anyone possibly know that?
Well, there are reasons to believe it. Part of it is the fact that that's what the number 9 was honored in many ancient civilizations. There are many 9-storied pyramids and so forth. It doesn't go beyond that. But the second thing is that if you look at, there is a pattern to these different quantum states that are brought into existence by the waves. And so the ninth wave is really some kind of a return to a unity that it existed before the civilizations first emerged. And so the history of humankind, you might say, goes from unity through separation and back to unity. And then you can't, there's really nothing more to come, I would say. This work is all empirically based. In other words, there's saying that there was a big shift in consciousness 3115 BCE. It's not just some kind of philosophical speculation on my part. It comes out of the fact that this is when the Maya described a quantum shift in the cosmic center, and the empirical evidence that we have that before that there were no civilizations, and after that we have civilizations. So a shift took place. And it wasn't like the next day or the next year that the Egyptians built the big pyramid at Giza. It took a couple of 100 years, actually. So there is a delay, you might say, in the effects. But if you look closely, you will find that at the very beginning, there are signs of the emergence of a new state of consciousness when these quantum shifts happen.
So last question, how are you going to try to get into the path of the downloader? How are you going to do that? What's your strategy?
How to download them?
Yeah, this latest one,
right.
You said something about the new year. What's your plan?
Yeah, so that's an event. People can go to my website, calleman.com, where I advertise that event, and it really is about conveying practical tools for people. But of course, as with everything, it all starts with an intention and a desire to do this. And, I think today, politically speaking, and that's really an expression of these different states of consciousness that exist at the different times, people are actually drifting apart to an extent where there's no communication. This is a new phenomenon, actually. Regardless of what side of the political spectrum you are, there is a drift apart of people's thinking, politically speaking. And that has to do with the fact that people are resonating with different states of consciousness. And so for anyone who want to go towards one that's not based on conflict, on separation and so forth, the goal should be, I would say, to download the ninth wave, to transcend above these conflicts that are so prevalent in the world of today.
Okay, well, very good. Well, Carl, we've been talking a long time. So what's the best way, again, let's reiterate at the end, how can people find out more? Where can they go?
Yeah, they should go to my website, which is www.calleman, CALLEMAN.com. And there they can find information about books and courses and so forth, as well as this event taking place on New Year's Day. You could find it on Facebook. You can go for my name, Carl Calleman, and find information. You can also go to my collaborator, Patricia Albert, who developed something called the Evolutionary Collective. That's the website of hers, evolutionarycollective.com. She has, without having missed my theoretical background, she has experienced the fact that in 2011, a new state of consciousness became accessible and developed techniques for people to learn who wants to be part of this and take the final step on the pyramid, so to speak. So these are resources that are available, and I just want to thank you for having me on this, and I think you have asked very, very meaningful and great questions, and it's great to have a discussion with you, Richard. But I should say that, without being able to show diagrams and so forth, much of this is hard to understand. So that's why.
If you have a place on your website where you have that, let's point listeners to it. Or,
sure. There's a lot of information on my website. Yes.
Okay, great. Well, Carl, thanks for coming. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Richard.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.